Sound testing 1, 2, 3.
You are audible, sir.
Thank you.
Molo good.
Molo, Dad.
Kunjani?
Yo, ngiyagula. Njani wena?
You're right. You no longer come to parliament.
Uthi aniseze eParliament? Ndiyaya xa kunyanzelekileyo.
Comrade Manyan.
Hey, Chair. Are you well?
You're right. Njani lapha Richard Square Mile in Africa.
The Richard Square Mile of Africa is doing very well. We were just welcoming the boys here, with the only people that are progressive and are appreciating the good work of Bafana Bafana. I know that some of you were busy with the debate of the farewell speech, but Tina, we are here.
Yeah, Kitty, you were making up for Moses Mabida, so we understand.
Right. That stadium was full. Some people just decided not to sit, to roam around and stand, but the numbers were there.
But the time the TV was showing us, it was half. The upper stand was empty. What happened?
No, not the upper stand, the portion behind the stage. And if you look the portion in front of the stage, between the stands, you will see that there were enough people that were standing because they wanted to see their leader face to face. They didn't want to see the screen behind the stand. They wanted to see him face to face. If you were to take those people and you put them there, they would have filled up that thing. We didn't have a shortage of people. Others actually didn't even have a place to stay, to sit. They actually went to the beach, others. But otherwise, no, that place was full. Even if you were to ask your comrades that run the stadium and ask how many people went through the turnstile, they will tell you that well over 65,000. So yeah, we've got even scientific evidence of this.
Hi. So let's science back up in visuals. When you are a communicator, you you know what it means when you have got such individuals going around showing a half empty stand. I mean,
No, it was
empty
not. I mean, if those people are honest, the only part that was like that is really the part just behind the stage only, not like half. That cannot constitute half the stadium, really. You know, unless ANC hasn't got an appreciation of numbers, but that can be half. Just this portion behind the stage.
You were sharing people with Kun, your friend, and Gizu.
No, KZN is big. He did his thing there. I don't know what he was doing there. But not now. We had the people that we wanted to be there, and they were all there. So we are just cruising nicely, and we're busy making sure that we take over KZN this year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Budle, how many are we? We are three, myself, Honorable Manye,
By
Dr.
six.
George.
By six. Yeah, but that.
Trouble with my computer. Hey, Tebu, can you WhatsApp me if you have got the link on the cell phone? There's trouble with my computer here. Access. It can't.
Okay.
Quickly. In just something more. Keza is a Samaya. Sure. Technology will cause problem. Remember to call 083679.
I can't WhatsApp that. I'll have to email you.
Email. I for into your email. Something is going wrong. Keza, I said to I don't know what's the problem.
Cover check and do WhatsApp.
You don't have the link in your WhatsApp.
Check at your WhatsApp.
Oh, thanks, Mama Village. Mama Village have rescued me. Okay. Hey,
Thank you.
technology can mess you up. Okay, let me switch off this computer and switch to.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Thanks, Mama Village. What's happening? Wait a bit. Let me get this thing right here. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I just had a technical problem with the. Okay, there we are. I will have to use the cell phone now instead of the laptop. Something just went wrong. Okay, but that as it may, thanks very much, honorable members. Let me welcome you again and welcome the parliamentary support team and everybody who's in the platform. Today's meeting, we are getting a briefing by Dr. George on the responsible spending bill 9 of 2023. The meeting is officially open. Roll call and apologies.
There were no apologies, sir.
Hold on. Hey, there is an echo. I can't switch on. the computer, something's wrong. Okay, be that as it may, let's proceed. There are no apologies. Let's move to the next item. Item 2, briefing by Dr. George, responsible spending bill, B9 2023, which is a private members bill. Over to you, Honorable Dr. George.
Chairperson, I'll be with you in a second. I'm just changing my background. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Good morning, colleagues. I will go straight then into the presentation. You have all received, I believe, the presentation and also received the bill, or the draft bill. Right. I'm going to read the slides into the record. Government's commitment to a redistributive policy framework has necessitated a significant increase in expenditure throughout the last decade and a half. Consequently, South Africa's fiscal environment has deteriorated and is now characterized by an unsustainable level of public debt, persistent deficit spending, and anemic economic growth. The 2023 medium-term budget policy statement projected a consolidated budget deficit of 4.9% for the 2023-24 fiscal year. It projects a consolidated budget deficit of 4.6% for the fiscal year 24-25, which it said would narrow to 4.2% in 25-26. Consolidated expenditure over the medium-term expenditure framework was projected to be 7.414 trillion rand, with an average deficit of 3.67%. Data released by Treasury in January 2024 suggests that the deficit will widen. To secure the funds necessary to finance this expenditure, government has resorted to deficit financing via increased debt issuance. While the strategy will provide immediate liquidity, it engendered a cascade of adverse effects, most notably the marked uptick in our risk premium and debt servicing costs. In this way, irresponsible fiscal management has crowded out necessary spending items and reduced fiscal flexibility. Government's debt burden has surged from just 27% of GDP in 2008 to 72.2%, which is 5.06 trillion rand in 23-24, as per the midterm budget policy statement. It revised the debt stabilization target upward to 77.7% of GDP for the fiscal year 26 to 27, far extended from the projections in the 23 budget. Debt service costs have been the fastest growing item on the budget, while consuming an increasing share of GDP and revenue for the past 2 decades. As a result, debt service costs have risen from 307.2 billion rand to 354 billion rand in the span of a year. Governments, like any other entity, must operate within their means. As discussed, when a government consistently spends more than it earns in revenue, a budget deficit forms. When these deficits persist year after year, government must borrow money and issue new debt to cover the shortfall. Over time, this unchecked cycle of spending and borrowing has pushed South Africa's finances to a crisis point. Introducing another fiscal rule to act as a framework for more responsible spending will bring back stability and encourage a forward-thinking approach to budget planning. There are several definitions here. I will just very briefly go through them. A fiscal rule is a legally binding constraint on fiscal policy that is established to impose a numerical limit on budget aggregates, such as government expenditure, revenue deficits, and/or debt. Their primary purpose is to ensure fiscal discipline by enforcing a sustainable balance between government income and spending. In this manner, they promote long-term economic stability and growth. The importance of fiscal rules lies in their ability to correct distorted incentives and contain the pressures of overspend, particularly during periods of economic prosperity. By imposing these constraints, fiscal rules can ensure that governments maintain fiscal responsibility. They thereby prevent excessive accumulation of debt and facilitate a stable economic environment conducive to investment and growth. South Africa stands out as having implemented an expenditure rule without accompanying it with a debt rule. This approach has become increasingly rare on the global stage and does have its drawbacks, most notably the limited flexibility to adjust spending in response to revenue fluctuations and economic conditions. While the expenditure ceiling has helped mitigate the pro-cyclicality of fiscal policy, it has not been sufficient to prevent a significant increase in debt to GDP ratio. This underscores the need for a more comprehensive fiscal framework that includes debt rules to ensure fiscal sustainability and economic resilience. The Responsible Spending Bill introduces a strategic shift in fiscal policy by integrating debt rules into existing expenditure frameworks. This approach is designed to reinforce fiscal discipline by setting sustainable limits on government's debt and expenditure. It will thereby ensure that spending decisions align with long-term economic stability and growth objectives. In this manner, the bill responds to the critical need for a balanced fiscal strategy that prevents excessive debt accumulation and promotes prudent financial management. Our current fiscal challenges are that South Africa's reliance on an expenditure rule without a debt rule has limited its ability to contain government spending in response to revenue shortfalls. Despite efforts to control spending, this approach has contributed to a rapid increase in the debt to GDP ratio, especially in a context of subdued GDP growth since 2009. The need for a comprehensive fiscal framework. Introducing a debt rule would enable a more risk-based fiscal policy and allow for adjustments in spending in line with debt sustainability. This would provide a more ambitious path towards fiscal consolidation, especially when debt sustainability risks are high. If we look at international evidence and recommendations, global evidence supports the effectiveness of fiscal rules in promoting fiscal discipline and reducing borrowing costs. Implementing a debt rule alongside the existing expenditure rule will align South Africa with international best practice. It would also address the limitations of a current fiscal framework by ensuring that spending adjustments are made in response to debt levels and will thereby enhance fiscal sustainability. Right. If we go to the provisions, as I mentioned earlier, the draft bill has been circulated, but very briefly, the bill sets precise targets for net loan debt as a percentage of GDP and institutes specific fiscal actions for varying debt levels. So, where debt is below 55% of GDP, government must achieve a primary budget surplus with government consumption expenditure growth restricted to GDP growth or lower. If it is between 55% and 60% of GDP, this requires an increased primary budget surplus alongside a freeze on the compensation increases for most public servants and a cap of government consumption expenditure growth. If it is above 60% of GDP, it demands further increased primary budget surplus, a 5% annual reduction in compensation for certain public servants, and stringent limits on government consumption expenditure growth. This structured, tiered approach to manage net loan debt relative to GDP introduces a disciplined fiscal framework that can dynamically adjust to South Africa's debt levels. At lower debt levels, ensuring a primary budget surplus and tying expenditure growth to GDP growth fosters fiscal sustainability, which acts as a safeguard against economic volatility. As debt increases, the requirements for higher surpluses and expenditure controls, including wage bill containment, reflects a more aggressive stance towards fiscal consolidation, which incentivizes economic growth and expenditure restraint. This approach balances the need for fiscal stability with the flexibility to respond to changing economic conditions, ensuring sustainable debt management while promoting economic resilience. Right, if we look at compensation of public servants, government employees covered by the occupation-specific dispensation funds are excluded from potential wage adjustments. The exclusion of this category of employees acknowledges the unique nature of their roles within the public sector. They encompass professionals in fields such as healthcare, education, and law enforcement, where recruitment and retention challenges are particularly acute due to the specialized skills and critical services they provide. Excluding these employees from wage freezes or reductions aims to maintain competitive compensation for these critical roles, ensuring that the public sector can attract and retain skilled professionals necessary to deliver essential public services. This targeted approach reflects a balanced fiscal policy that seeks to manage public expenditure responsibly while recognizing the importance of sustaining key public services that are vital to societal well-being and economic stability. The bill introduces a framework to control the growth of government expenditure by tying it directly to economic performance, particularly GDP growth. This approach is designed to ensure that increases in government spending do not exceed the economy's ability to support such spending sustainably. This will ensure that spending increases do not outpace the economy's capacity. It will prevent structural deficits and unsustainable debt accumulation, as well as prioritize investments that will deliver the greatest potential for economic stimulation and public welfare improvement. Importantly, it incentivizes behavior aimed at growing the economy and underpins a strategy where increased economic performance enables more spending. By demonstrating a commitment to fiscal responsibility, this measure is expected to enhance the South Africa's creditworthiness, reduce borrowing costs, and stabilize the macroeconomic environment, which will enable a virtuous cycle of fiscal health and economic expansion. The bill outlines conditions under which exemptions from the fiscal rules can be granted, specifically in cases of national emergencies, specific economic downturns, or other extraordinary circumstances. It establishes clear criteria for these exemptions and details the procedures for the government to return to compliance with the fiscal rules after the exemption expires. This provision acknowledges that rigid adherence to fiscal rules may not always be feasible or advisable in the face of severe unforeseen challenges. By allowing for temporary deviations, the bill ensures that fiscal policy can remain responsive to the immediate needs of the economy and society. Importantly, the inclusion of procedures for returning to compliance post-exemption emphasizes a commitment to fiscal discipline in the long term. This balance between flexibility and responsibility allows government to address urgent issues without compromising the overall goal of fiscal sustainability and stability. The rationale behind this approach is to ensure that while immediate and necessary responses to crises are possible, they do not derail the overarching fiscal framework designed to maintain economic health and prevent unsustainable debt accumulation. The bill establishes monitoring and reporting mechanism that will ensure strict compliance with its fiscal rules. The Minister of Finance will be required to table an annual report in the National Assembly that details government's adherence to the established fiscal rules. This report must include an assessment of compliance or non-compliance with the fiscal rules, specific reasons for non-compliance, and proposed corrective measures to address any deviations. The annual compliance report serves as a tool for accountability, as well as a basis for taking corrective action where necessary. It ensures the fiscal policy remains aligned with the bill's objectives of achieving and maintaining sustainable debt levels and responsible spending. In this way, it provides a clear pathway for adjustments should deviations occur. These reporting requirements are designed to foster a culture of transparency and accountability within government's management of the fiscus. By mandating detailed public reporting, the bill aims to keep the legislature and the public informed about government's fiscal practices and its commitment to maintaining fiscal discipline. The involvement of the National Assembly in reviewing the annual compliance report reinforces Parliament's oversight of fiscal policy. This process allows for a comprehensive review of fiscal practices and the opportunity for lawmakers to recommend changes or improvements to ensure ongoing compliance with the bill's provisions. That is the end. Chair, I did say that I was going to be brief, and I have been, as everybody has received the bill, had a look at it. The crux of the matter really is, as I have said, it's to achieve sustainability in debt and ensure that spending is managed effectively so that we do not end up in a fiscal space that we cannot get ourselves out of. And the rules are quite clear in terms of what is required. So that is my proposed responsible spending bill. And I'm handing over back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. George, for the briefing on your bill. Honorable members, there we are. Now we are on the item where members have to engage Dr. George on the bill that he has presented. Are there clarity seeking questions and or comments from the members? Dr. George, has the bill gone through the process of SEAS? Has the parliamentary support team assisted you to do that? Before you respond, let me also take Honorable Manye over to you, and then Honorable de Villiers and Maviles. Honorable Manye.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I've listened very carefully to the presentation, and to be really blunt and honest, I'm actually disappointed. I thought I didn't read the material given beforehand. I wanted a fresh perspective so that I don't come into this meeting with a preconceived idea. So I thought I'm going to come here with an open mind. I was hoping to hear something that was going to change everything, as it were. But instead, what we've been presented with here today is actually what one could characterize as the changing chairs in the Titanic, as it were. It's absolutely nothing fresh that has been brought around. It's just manipulation of the formula and all of that. There's nothing. I thought, for instance, we'd hear some concrete proposals that are going to help us to get out of the quagmire. One of the things that I was hoping to hear, for instance, is the issue of a corporate tax, something about increasing corporate tax from 28% to 32%, just something that is real and practical that can help us out of this quagmire. And to hear that something about increasing the capital and inheritance gains tax, one was hoping to hear something about the increased taxes on speculative capital inflows to a figure of like 60% to make sure that we don't have these speculators that are messing up the market. I thought we'd hear something about raising additional 100 billion annually through curbing illicit financial flows, which is the biggest problem, including the expropriation of multinational companies which participate in tax avoidance, and actually institute stronger penalty regime and jail sentences for directors and executives that continue this criminal conduct. These are kind of things that I was hoping to hear. That will hear that there will be a passing of an anti-avoidance of tax act in the Tax Act to illegalize all forms of tax avoidance over and above the tax evasion, and to ensure that all those found to be engaged in tax avoidance and tax-based erosion are imprisoned. These are kinds of things that will ensure that our fiscus is properly managed. I was really hoping that I would hear something concrete, like, for instance, launching of a judicial commission of inquiry into illicit financial flows and dating back since 1990. headed by a constitutional judge very soon, that to be put into place just in the next year. You know, a commission that will include local and international experts on illicit financial flows and make specific recommendations in respect of the various transgressions. So, Chair, I must say what I've heard was not inspiring. I mean, I thought we'd also hear something about having of cabinet to make sure that we've got people that are just right for the economy of this country. I mean, to have the size of executive that we have here today is really a wasteful expenditure. I thought it would be something about getting rid of deputy minister positions, which are basically as executive assistants of ministers. So indeed, I came here with very high expectations, and instead all we got here is just playing around of the formula, remove the numerator here, put the denominator there, square root this, and then all of that. It's just a manipulation of the formula, nothing about input costs, nothing about putting into place systems that are going to also respond to irresponsible executive that goes around the world, mortgaging the country on all kinds of loans, as it were, you know. So yeah, Chair, I mean, we have a situation here. We have a situation where 28 million people are already reported to be just sitting there and receiving money. Nothing being said about economic growth to make sure that a bulk of those 28 million people that the ANC has impoverished, that those people are actually brought onto the mainstream economy. And so that all of that is going to have what you call a multiplier effect and make sure that our economy goes to the high level. I really was hoping that those are the kinds of real things that we're about to hear to rebase our economy. But instead, all we've heard here is just a fiddling. So I don't waste anybody's time. I think for us as the EFF, we rejected this. It's really a complete waste of time. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Manya. Though we have not yet reached the stage where we discuss the motion of desirability. So we take your points, but the last point, just keep it for now until we reach that stage. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry,
Honorable-
Chair. Sorry, Chair. Just quickly. Sorry to do this. Just one last thing, Chair. I forgot to mention that one of the biggest eaters of our fiscus is corruption. Now, to have this kind of a bill that hasn't got one word about corruption, it really that means that we're not about to deal with corruption if we listen to this proposal. Corruption is at the center of all of this. I mean, if you look at the line item of our budget, the biggest line item is this debt servicing costs and all of that. Now, all of that money that we keep borrowing disappears into corruption. Now, to have a bill like this that is totally silent, the word corruption does not appear in any of this. I mean, really, where is this taking us, Chair? Sorry, Chair, I can't hide my disappointment. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Honorable Manya. Honorable de Villiers.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, fellow members of the committee. My network is a little bit unstable. I'm going to try with my video on, but Chair, if I break up, please let me know, and then I will just turn my video off. So firstly, I'd like to congratulate Dr. George. I think this is absolutely a step in the right direction. To me, if I can sum this up, it really is about fiscal sustainability. Make it a partisan issue that any person, any organization, and especially any government should not have more debt than it is actually capable of paying back. And in the instance of a country, what makes it really tough is when we have unresponsible levels of debt, it means that we are using our income, our taxpayer money, to pay interest on that debt, which could be used for service delivery. It means people are not getting roads because we are paying too much debt. It means people are not getting water, clean water. People are not getting police services, hospital services. Everything that our tax money is supposed to be doing, creating better lives for all our people, is restricted when we have too much debt. And just looking at my own life, the only way I do anything better is if I have rules. If I have a rule about when I get up, when I do my emails, when whatever I have to do. If you make rules for yourself, then you become disciplined, and then you create good habits, and then you have sustainability in what you want to achieve. And it's exactly the same for any organization or for government. And I don't think that this bill tries to solve broader issues like corruption, which is a big problem, or it's not supposed to dictate specific tax. That's really not the idea of this bill. The idea of this bill, the way I see it, is to create fiscal sustainability. It's to say, how can we create dynamic rules for the country and how we should manage our debt? Because we can all agree that a form of debt, a form of finance, is unfortunately necessary for infrastructure development, and for a lot of the things we need to do, which actually creates economic growth. But there's a balance. You can have too much debt, and when you have too much debt, you do have problems. And specifically, you have problems because you're paying too much interest. And I think that's really what this bill at its core is about. So I think that at the very least, the principles that it's based on and what it tries to achieve is a responsible fiscal sustainability framework where we as a country spend our money on services for our people, on what our government is supposed to be doing, and not burden our people with too much debt repayment. So I salute you, Dr. George. I think it's great work, and I look forward to the comments of the other members. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable De Villiers. Honorable Mavilet.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable George, fiscal responsibility simply means using money wisely and having to stick to the budget that you've been given. I was hoping, Honorable George, that you would give an example of the city of Tshwane, who couldn't even use one tiny weeny cent of the grant money that they were given. You know, this money, can you imagine, 646 billion in grants. They didn't use it. That is the most irresponsible thing that I've ever heard in decades. You know, Honorable George, if you have just put that as an example, for you to be fair, or as an example, you know, irresponsible spending. This money was supposed to go to urban and township and informal settlement upgrades. I'm sure perhaps you haven't been to the city of Tshwane. If you can go there and see what is happening today. And who does that? Returning grant money, just said, no, I'm not spending it. That is the most irresponsible thing that I've ever heard, Honorable George. So, you know, bringing this thing here, and I'm still thinking about yesterday. My heart breaks. I will stop there.
Thanks, Honorable Mavilet. Honorable Sarupen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, before I get into my main comments of the bill, I just think that we must, as members of Parliament, conduct ourselves responsibly and based on facts. And the first fact is that the claim about 2.6 billion rand being withdrawn from Tshwane is incorrect, because that would be the entire city's budget and grants. And the DA is currently considering its options against Mr. Lesufi for peddling fake news. particularly in terms of the Electoral Act, which bars that, because National Treasury has written to the city asking them to account for a small unspent portion of the grants, which is just under 600 million rand that is being looked at the moment. So we must just be careful not to peddle disinformation in an election year. It is against the Electoral Act. But Chair, let me get into my main comments. Firstly, the consideration around fiscal rules. I'd like to ask Dr. George if my understanding is correct, his main concern with fiscal rules here is to solve the economic problem in economic theory of time inconsistency, which basically means that policymakers don't stick to optimal plans to grow an economy and prevent long-term high interest rates and prevent fiscal crises and economic instability through excessive debt borrowing. And so this is, and my understanding is that this is an attempt to overcome what you call in economics the time inconsistency problem through a batch of fiscal rules. That's the first thing I'm going to ask Dr. George. And the second thing I'd ask Dr. George is, we know that fiscal discipline has become a problem, and then as a result, targets are not being met on economic growth, on debt level containment. Does he think that this is the best, most effective way to deal with getting fiscal discipline restored? In the long run, of course, we know that fiscal rules lead to macroeconomic stability. Does he see the current volatility as a consequence of excessive debt? And will this bill help us restore macroeconomic stability? And lastly, credibility and trust. Fiscal rules are designed to ensure the credibility of government policies and to ensure that government policies can be trusted on international capital markets. And does he think that this will take us a long way towards that? Thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Solupan. Honorable Abraham.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much. I wish to also thank Honorable George for the draft. It displays that members are thinking about the legislation that is existing in our country. Now, my thoughts. Honorable George, sorry, through you, Chair, don't you think, as I do, that this bill will hamper the agility of fiscal policy to respond to the changing conditions effectively? Now, secondly, in my view, the stability of the public service should be our concern also as public representatives. So if the bill excludes occupation-specific dispensation referred to as OSD from wage adjustments, what do we say about equitable approach? What is the view in that regard if we have that exclusion in the bill? Chair, we all know that fiscal spending contributes to the aggregate demand of the economy and therefore stimulates growth. But the debt to GDP ratio is not the only indicator to assess fiscal stability, Chair, as many developed economies have a higher debt to GDP ratio. Still developed, but higher debt to GDP ratio. If Honorable George can comment on those points. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Honorable Abraham. Honorable Scosan. Charlie.
Ntokoze Desihlalo, and good morning to all honorable members our support team, and viewers at home. Yeah, no, we appreciate the presentation from Honorable Dr. George. So at this stage, Honorable Chair, I don't want to comment on the contents of the draft bill, but I'm just asking myself, as he was busy presenting, and I want to ask this question to the meeting. Seeing that we are left with only 6 weeks before we rise, and noting that we will be rising for good as the 6th administration or as the 6th parliament, because we're going to spend the next quarter of the year campaigning for elections for our political parties, all of us. So introducing a new bill at this stage, when we are left with only 6 weeks, is it going to help us? Is it helpful to the society? Because the likelihood is that we are not going to finish the processes that were supposed to go through. As we all know that it's a very long process to deal with the bill, going for public participation, dealing with motion of desirability, finalizing the bill, dealing with clause by clause, adopting the report, taking it to the NA. So since we're only left with 6 weeks, shouldn't we be spending the remaining 6 weeks in finalizing bills that are pending, if we have any, in finalizing reports that are still pending, that are supposed to be submitted to the NA, so that when we end this term, all the processes that we have started, we should have wrapped them up, and then new bills will then come into the next administration. Those who will come back, then they will start with the new bills and process them and take them to public participation, all that. Does it help us just to introduce a bill for the sake of introducing it, and then from there we leave it and put it on the shelves and go home? And then the next honorable members who will be coming in the next administration, then is them who will then do 90% part of what was supposed to be done to that particular. Does it help us? I mean, because I thought we're going to use the remaining 6 weeks to tighten loose screws and make sure that we finish what we have started, instead of starting something new that we won't be able to finish. That's the question that I have to the meeting. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, let me invite Dr. George to respond to those questions and or comments. Over to you, Dr. George.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much, colleagues, for your questions and inputs. I will start off with Honorable Manyi. Honorable Manyi is talking about revenue rules. Now, revenue rules in fiscal policy, such as those that might be contemplated but not included in the responsible spending bill, can be seen as inadequate for several reasons. Primarily, they focus less on the expenditure side and more on ensuring revenue targets are met, which can lead to an over-reliance on tax increases or the creation of new taxes during economic downturns. This approach might not address the root cause of fiscal imbalances, often excessive spending, and can inadvertently harm economic growth by increasing the tax burden on businesses and individuals. Effective fiscal management requires a balanced approach that includes both responsible spending controls and prudent revenue generation strategies. Why they are harmful is that revenue rules focused on meeting specific tax income targets can be harmful for several reasons. They encourage increased taxation or the creation of new taxes during economic downturns, particularly stifling economic growth. Such rules disproportionately affect business and individuals, reducing disposable income and investment capital. Additionally, they focus primarily on revenue generation. These rules overlook the importance of controlling government spending, leading to fiscal imbalances. Ultimately, a narrow focus on revenue without adequate attention to expenditure can lead to economic inefficiencies and hinder sustainable fiscal management. And so that is the revenue part that Honorable Manyi was talking about. Also, I'm sure Honorable Manyi does read widely, and if he did read widely, he would know that the DA presents a comprehensive alternative budget every year in February, and we will be doing again next week. And that budget sets out in detail our views on growth, how we grow our economy, how we manage our debt, support for vulnerable South Africans battling with the cost of living crisis, battling to put enough food on their tables. And also, it focuses very heavily on fighting corruption, because it is so that corruption is a scourge on our economy. We are grey listed, as we all know, and so we know that we have a very significant problem in terms of fighting corruption, and we must do that. We also, the DEA annually does a alternative medium-term budget policy statement in October, which sets out our expectations for February, as we did last year, and as far as everybody will remember, as far back as memory will take us, that we've done an alternative. And so when Honorable Manyi talks about his disappointment that it wasn't broader, this bill is specifically focused on the fact that we need to manage our debt, we need to manage our spending, and we need to get government to behave in a fiscally sensible way that will encourage growth, so that all of the people in South Africa can reach their full potential. So that is my response to Honorable Manyi, and thank you for your comments and questions. Honorable de Villiers, yes, absolutely, you got it spot on. That is what we are looking to achieve. Every single alternative budget, every single alternative medium-term budget policy statement, our DA's economic policy that we have recently updated in preparation for the election and the future, sets out how we see our economy growing into the future. It is in fact possible, despite all of the difficulties we are faced with the current situation, but it is possible for our country to be the great country it is capable of being. It is capable of growing. It is in fact a rich country. We are in difficulty because that some economic policies have been chosen that have not taken us where we should be. Honorable Mabiletsa, Honorable Sarapin did touch briefly on Tshwane. I don't think we really need to go into the detail of a local municipality here. I think very importantly for us, as members of the National Assembly, with a much wider perspective, including, of course, local government, but a much wider perspective, is that we need to look at what is happening nationally. For example, we need to look at spending. And as I keep saying over and over again in our alternative budgets and in every other place that where we discuss these matters, is that government is spending very excessively on bailing out state-owned enterprises that are not succeeding, and they are not growing our economy, and they never will. And that is a massive, massive, massive amount of money that is depriving vulnerable South Africans of the support that they need to assist them to move beyond poverty. So that is a massive expenditure that is entirely unnecessary. And also, if we look, we've discussed the public sector wage bill. It is out of control. And as we've said before, we believe that there need to be people on the front line of service delivery that are able to deliver the services and are very capable of doing so. And they must be adequately compensated. But we need to focus very heavily on the millionaire managers who are not adding the value that we need from the public service. And that's why it is so important. We need to focus in a specific place to contain the debt. It is simple. If you cannot afford to pay all your expenses, your overheads get too high, your debt levels get too high, you eventually have no money to pay for the services that you must pay for. And we've all agreed, I'm sure, this committee, we all agree that vulnerable South Africans are battling a cost of living crisis. They are struggling. There are 5 million children in South Africa that are starving, according to the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. That is unacceptable in a country as wealthy as this one. Then to Honorable Sarupan, thank you very much for your question. Good technical question. But yes, indeed, that is in fact the crux of what we are looking at. We need fiscal rules to ensure that government manages our finances effectively. That's what we are trying to do. So what we're trying to say is, look, any government needs to make sure that it manages prudently in such a way that it then does create, in fact, that macroeconomic stability that we want. The fiscal discipline, because it is very easy for a government to just spend and spend and spend and spend until you have spent yourself into unsustainability, as we are heading in South Africa. And then you need to start looking at how you're going to squeeze service delivery. Always hits the most vulnerable people hardest, or then you've got to start looking at, well, how we're going to actually raise more tax. I mean, you know, the idea of the possibility of a VAT increase fills me certainly with horror, and I'm sure the entire population, because people simply cannot afford to buy enough food for their children and their families. And that is why we've proposed that the basket of 0 VAT rated items should be expanded, but I won't go into that. We all know what I have said over and over again on that. So yes, in a nutshell, we need stability. And that is what investors look for. Investors need to know South Africa's open for business. Come and invest in our country. We have enormous potential. But the environment needs to be created where people are satisfied, investors are satisfied that they are going to get a return, obviously, else they wouldn't come, that the infrastructure is going to be developed so that they can actually operate their businesses effectively, and that then they can effectively partner with a country such as ours with such enormous potential. So that is what we are wanting to achieve, and it is very much achievable if government does have a set of rules that it has to stick to and that Parliament holds them accountable for. But that then brings me to the question from Honourable Abrahams regarding, does a set of rules like this actually hamper the agility of a government or a treasury to respond to a dynamic environment? You did see in the rules as I have proposed them, or the bill as I proposed, that takes that into cognizance, because of course that is not what you want to do. What you want to do is to create an environment that has rules, but I mean, there's always going to be a circumstance that is unforeseen. Like, we didn't know COVID was coming, and then when it came, well, we had to respond in some way, you know. So you can't tie yourself into a knot either. So that is not what we would want to do. You don't want to have put a government into a set of handcuffs and then they actually can't move, because that doesn't help anybody either. So no, there is a mechanism that provides for compensation or allows to compensate for particular economic circumstances. Other countries may have higher ratios to debt. That is in fact so. But the crucial difference in those instances is that those economies are growing. Our economy is not growing. We know the crisis with the energy, with the electricity. Our economy isn't growing, and that is the root of our problems. Our economy isn't growing, so we've got a growth problem and we have a spending problem. And I think anybody can actually do the maths to see where that takes us, and it is not down a good road. Also, other countries, unlike our developing economy, which is relatively small, our currency is one of the most highly traded, as you would know, in the world, and it is volatile. They have more stable currencies. Our currency is not so. It is very volatile and is likely to remain that way. So the circumstances are different. And it is so that we need to look very clearly at our own South African economy. And we need to say, well, yes, we are peculiar. We have a very troubled history. We are emerging. We are becoming something. Our democracy is growing, etc. We are heading to some greatness in the future. But on the way, we need to find the best way to get there. And this is one of the proposed mechanisms to enable government to do the job that it is elected to do. Then Honourable Skhosana, yes, indeed, you're right. We don't have a lot of time left in this term. We're likely having an election in May. But it is also true that this bill is not new. It has been in the system for a year and a half. The chair also asked the question earlier regarding whether the parliamentary support team had been involved. Yes, indeed, they have. And I must compliment them for their very professional service in processing and also ensuring that guidelines are followed properly, etc. But yes, in fact, it has. But it's been going through the system for a very long time. I think Honourable Skhosana will also remember that when COVID began and we started to exercise our mind on what we're going to do, and we did start talking about proposals, I had a private member's bill way back then. I mean, it's been 5 years nearly. So, you know, things take time. But no, this is not new. And I do think that it's possible for us to process it. The question is it helpful? I think absolutely it is very helpful because, I mean, you know, we don't know. We can't actually look into a crystal ball and know what the future will bring. But it is likely that South Africa is going to have a new government after the election, possibly a coalition government. And if that is in fact the outcome, we need to ensure that we have got some effective rules in place to make sure that it has the guidelines, it has the rules, so that it can behave appropriately for everybody in South Africa. So I don't think that the timing should get in our way. I know there's a lot to do. We really have been very busy and will continue to be extremely busy. And next week's going to be even more busy with the budgets, etc. But we are capable people, in my view. We have represented our people as best we can. And that I have no doubt that if we apply our minds effectively and clearly to the benefit of our people, that we will be able to move swiftly if necessary. So, Chair, that is all the responses that I have. Again, I'd like to express my gratitude to my colleagues for their questions. They've been very thought-provoking. And I'd like to just leave the last comment of saying that I did, and we did, the people around me that have supported me on putting this bill together, thought long and hard about this bill, about, you know, how would it be better for South Africa? You know, we want to always ask ourselves a very simple question. Does this take our democracy forward? Does this take our people to a better place? Is this good for our country? If the answer is yes, then we must keep walking down that road. If the answer is no, then we must not walk down that road. We must find another one. So we do have a massive potential in our country. We've had a troubled history. We are still in progress, and we are making good progress towards a country that everybody would be able to flourish in. It will take time, but I believe that this bill is one of those mechanisms that take us possibly forward, even if it's a little bit forward. We cannot fix everything, but we must certainly try where we can. Thank you very much, Chair. Much appreciated.
Okay, thanks, Dr. George and colleagues. So the bill will follow the processes like any other bill, whether tabled by the minister, deputy minister, or a committee. So we'll take the bill to the next stage. We'll see how we deal with the time frames. if it's not possible, that the bill be passed within this short space of time, because we don't want to be unconstitutional. It means it's going to lapse. It's going to be taken by the next parliament. So that's the process. But we'll treat it like any bill. Thanks very much. Are there announcements? Support team of Parliament. Do we have any announcement before we adjourn the meeting?
There are no announcements at the moment, sir.
Okay. Thanks very much, honorable members. The meeting is adjourned. We'll meet at 2 o'clock at the SONA debate. Thanks.
Long live the chair.
Malubongwe.
Happy Valentine's, comrades.
Recording stopped.